I'm very excited that Art could come and speak to us today. I heard him talk at a climate change conference back in the fall. And although there are a number of good speakers, it was Art's message that was the one that I was still thinking about weeks later. So I am thrilled that he's agreed to join us today. Art, I'll let you introduce yourself. So I'll hand the floor over to you.
Well, thank you very much. So I appreciate the invitation to speak to you, and just a very small, short introduction. I'm an earth scientist. I have a degree in geology. I've worked in the energy sector for the better part of 4.5 decades. I've done oil and gas and renewables and economics and markets and price. And I'm at a stage in my life and my career where trying to put it all together and make some sense of it all. And just for a little bit of perspective, I have 4 grandchildren that are all in school. My oldest grandchild is she's 15, and so she's right in the thick of the beginning of high school. I've got some that are in elementary. So what you people are working on is personally important to me, not just, I'm just some speaker that got dragged in here. I have a certain vested interest in helping you to give information to my grandchildren. So thank you for doing that. That's a little background on me. The talk that I gave, I'm going to warn you, it shocked a lot of people at this climate conference. I'm not going to, there's nothing lewd or or indecent about it, but the message that I'm going to present to you is not the standard message. It is, however, what I believe to be a truthful message. So with that, I guess it's a warning. I don't know what it is. Get this started so we can move through it. And if you have any questions at the end, I'll be certainly glad to give you my best effort to answer them. Okay, so the title of my talk is Getting Honest About the Human Predicament. And the very first thing that I want to try to get across is that climate change is a very narrow view of the human predicament. Now, it's a very important view, but it is narrow. And so the cartoon character in my diagram, he's laser focused in this particular case on carbon emissions, but not particularly paying all that much attention to all the other subjects around him, which include biodiversity law, water crisis, education, resource scarcity, overconsumption, air pollutants, and you can read all of these yourself. They're not a complete list, but they get the idea across. And so after studying energy, economics, population, human behavior, ecology for most of my life, at least my adult life, I believe that a broader perspective is needed in order to put this climate change, carbon emissions problem into some perspective. And if that's where you want to return and focus your energy, it's certainly an important problem. But what I'd like to give you is a slightly different perspective when you get back to it. So this graph shows 4 things. It shows consumption, and that's not the most important thing about it, of 4 things called cement or concrete, steel, plastic, and fertilizer. Now, these are what Václav Smil, who is one of my energy heroes, he calls these the 4 pillars of modern civilization. So without these 4 things, modern civilization will collapse. And we don't commonly think about these because they're such a part of our lives. But the bad news is that we don't know how to make any of these pillars of modern civilization at the scale that we use them in any other way except by using fossil fuels. So when we hear people say, oh, we've just got to get off of fossil fuels, I couldn't agree more, but there's a problem. And that is, if we get off of fossil fuels, if we were somehow able to do that, instantly or over some relatively short period of time, our entire civilization would collapse. Without cement or concrete and steel and plastic and fertilizer, our economy would crater. If any of you have ever been to a doctor or a hospital or a clinic recently, maybe you didn't notice, but next time you go, look around the room. It's full of plastic. The healthcare industry is one of the largest consumers of plastic in the world. And nobody wants to deny people medical care. We don't have any way of making plastic except from crude oil and natural gas. It's a problem. One of the reasons that we have a lot of these environmental problems is that we've got 8 billion people living on the planet right now. The bottom curve there is fertilizer. Without the ammonia that goes into fertilizer, and it comes from natural gas, we couldn't possibly feed 8 billion people. We had 2 billion people on the planet at the end of World War I, and that was when commercial fertilizer began to get into the market. So again, I'm not arguing whether we do or don't want to get off of fossil fuels. What I'm saying is that if we don't keep in mind all of these things, there's going to be a huge, an unbearable amount of human suffering and death, by the way, like starvation, lack of medical care, no roads, no construction, no building. So, we have this is a perspective that most people don't have, nor do I expect them to have. I mean, that's my business. That's why I'm here talking to you. So I'm not even going to get into, well, I will get into briefly. I mean, what's an electric car made of? An electric car is made almost exclusively of steel and plastic. So you can't even make an EV without fossil fuel. It's just, what's a solar panel made of? What's a wind turbine made of? Most people don't know that that the blade on a wind turbine is made of plastic. Okay, so again, I'm not trying to criticize. I'm not saying we're doing anything wrong. I'm just saying we can't do any of this. We don't know how to do any of this without fossil fuels. And somebody out there is smart enough to say, oh, yeah, but, we are recycling steel and we're figuring out how to recycle concrete. Okay, great. Remember what I said. I said at scale. Okay, so maybe if we're lucky, at some time in the future, we can recycle 30% of steel that we have. Concrete, not so easy. None of it's cheap. So all I'm saying is that you hear a lot of solution-oriented things in the news. Oh, somebody just figured out how to do something. Well, somebody may have figured it out. Most figured it out fail on upscaling. But even if they're completely successful, we're talking about decades in the future. And from my perspective, we don't have decades in the future to wait for something to save us. Energy is the economy. I know that is probably a perspective that many of you have never heard about before. But this is a graph that shows world oil consumption cross-plotted against GDP, the gross domestic product, or an economic indicator of each country on Earth. Now, I haven't marked them all because there's too many. But what the graph shows is that the countries that consume the most oil, in this case, the United States and China and Japan and Germany and a few others, have the highest gross domestic product. These are the most prosperous countries. The countries down in the lower left quadrant, these are extremely poor countries. These are countries that struggle to feed their people. So again, there's no judgment value here. This is just an empirical relationship And for those who like statistics, the correlation of the line that I've fitted through there, it has a correlation coefficient in R squared of 96. Okay, that is statistically perfect. You don't have to like it, but it's the truth. Oil consumption correlates with economic prosperity. Okay, so we have another problem. We want to decrease the amount of oil we use. Fine. That's going to decrease the level of economic prosperity or the standard of living that we enjoy. That's okay. I think it's okay with me, but I don't think that most of the people who've signed up for climate change and energy transition understand that they're also signing up for a substantially reduced standard of living. And if they knew that, they'd say, whoa, wait a minute, hold the phone. I didn't sign up for that. Energy is the economy. This is a quote from a very close friend of mine who is quite an expert on many of the things and more that I'm talking about. He said, most people think the economy runs on money. It doesn't. It runs on energy. Energy is the economy. Money is a claim on the work that comes from energy, and debt is a lien on future energy. And so what he's saying, what Nate is saying here, is that money is just, it's a measure of account. It doesn't have any value of its own. And so in the simplest kind of analogy, let's go, way back in history, I have a bunch of wheat that I had a good harvest, and I've got bushels of wheat in the storehouse, and I have more than I need, and I would like you to do some physical work for me. And I'll tell you what, dig me a ditch or build me a fence or whatever that I want you to do, and I will give you a bushel of wheat. And you can use that bushel of wheat to feed your family, or maybe you want to trade that bushel of wheat for, some beads or, whatever, barter economy. So the bushel of wheat is, of course, energy, food. You can eat it and it creates energy. Well, you can only trade bushels of wheat for so long. And eventually we say, hey, look, I've invented this thing called a coin. And this coin is exchangeable for one bushel of wheat. So if you dig the ditch, I'm going to give you a coin, and you can take the coin and go to the wheat depot and trade it for a bushel of wheat. So the money is just a way of accounting for the energy. So what I'm really paying the guy for is his sweat, his physical labor, his calories, his joules. And the money is just a claim on that work. It's a different way of thinking about it. It's the right way to think about it, too. It's not dispute. So we all believe and have heard that we're in some kind of a dramatic and, the overused word, unprecedented energy transition. Okay, well, I'm here to tell you there is no energy transition. There is no paradigm shift, and there is no green revolution. All of that stuff that you hear, it's not untrue, but it's so only partly true that it comes very close to being a distortion of the truth. Or you could put it a different way, it's propaganda. And so the graph that I'm showing, it goes from 1800 to the present. And it shows all of the components of energy that we use in the world today. And so at the very bottom in gray is biomass. And that was the main form of energy up until, the middle of the 19th century. And then the brown came in, which was coal. And a little bit later, the oil came in, which was green, and the red, natural gas, and so on and so forth up the line. And very, very late in the process, up at the top and the right, we see the solar in yellow and the wind in blue. All right. So what I have to tell you here, unfortunately, is that energy transitions don't work the way that we believe they do. energy transitions are additive. They're not subtractive. We never get rid of an energy source. We never stop using something in favor of something else. So if you look at the graph, look at the bottom, biomass. All right, we are actually using more biomass today than we used in 1800. We never transitioned away from biomass. Now, as a percentage of the total, biomass went from almost 100% in 1800 to probably 5% today. So if you just look at percentages, we say, oh my goodness, biomass really decreased a lot. Well, no, it didn't. Not its absolute use. And when we're talking about the Earth doesn't know about percentages, or, the Earth isn't a person. So I'm using this kind of metaphorically. All the Earth cares about is emissions, if we're talking about climate change. And so it doesn't make the Earth feel any better to know that the percent of biomass as a percent of total has gone from 100% to 5%. The Earth says, hey, I'm still feeling, the same amount of biomass as emissions. The same is true for coal. I mean, we hear all the time, coal's going away. Well, no, it's not, actually. I mean, if you look right here, if you can see my pointer, if not, you can, you'll have a copy of this. The average amount of coal that has been used over the last 15 years is 25% higher than it was in the previous 15 years. So coal's not going away at all. The percentage of coal of the total may be going down or getting flat, but we're using more coal than we ever did before. So what's happening here is that we're just adding, if you want to count nuclear as a renewable, nuclear, solar, wind, nuclear, solar, and wind on top of an ever-increasing pile of biomass, coal, oil, natural gas, etc. And so as long as our total energy consumption keeps going up, and as long as the things that are causing the most emissions are not going down, then we're not solving any problems at all. We're somehow just trying to feel better. Hey, I bought a Tesla, I'm saving the planet. No, you're not. If you like a Tesla, buy one. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just that, none of the things that are supposed to be helping the planet are doing anything at the moment to help the planet. And for those who have hope in the future, I'll get to that. Here's all the evidence you need. This is global carbon dioxide emissions. Okay? This is publicly available information. This goes from 1850 to the present. So we had our first World Climate Conference in 1979, and we had the first COP, the first COP meeting in 1995. We just finished the 28th COP meeting in Abu Dhabi in December. And what has happened? Global emissions have increased 18 billion tons per year, 93%, since the first World Climate Conference in 1979. And they've increased 15 gigatons, or 61%, since the convening of parties, COP1 in 1995. So we're doing all these meetings and we're talking about this great transition. But if the Earth is out there looking, he's saying, you guys aren't helping me out in, because emissions just keep going up and up and up. And the reason for that is because energy consumption, all energy consumption, keeps going up and up and up. Where is the transition? The Earth doesn't know about it yet. I, as an energy scientist, I don't see it. It's all talk. Now, I said that energy was the economy. Here is the same graph that I showed you 2 slides ago that shows all the progression of energy sources. Only in this one, I'm showing in black gross domestic product. That's the Earth's the whole planet's economic activity. And, you don't need a degree in statistics to see that there is a one-to-one or nearly a one-to-one correlation between economic activity, I already showed you that graph, and increasing amounts of energy. So we hear an awful lot about technology, human ingenuity, and efficiency. Somehow, man, we got problems, but technology will find a way. Humans are awfully ingenious. We'll find a way. Look how efficient we are. We're improving things all the time. Well, I mean, all those things are true, but I have to tell you that those are absolutely secondary or tertiary in importance. So just to give you an example, I have looked at the improvements in that these factors, technology, ingenuity, and efficiency, have made in advancing economic progress, economic activity, GDP, by using less energy. Okay, if we're trying to solve the planet's problems, that's our number one theme. And you know what the number is? It's 1.1% per year. Okay, it's a rounding error to zero. Now, I'm not here to tell you that technology and ingenuity and efficiency are unimportant. I'm saying that if you think they're going to solve our planet's ecology and climate change problems, 1% a year, it's going to take a heck of a long time. So what's the conclusion? The conclusion is to stop rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic and address the elephant in the room, which is energy consumption. Let me be even more emphatic. This character over here, this orange guy, this is what my friend Nate Hagens called a fossil energy slave. Okay, so this guy represents 1 barrel of oil. And most people don't understand this, nor should they. But if you measure the amount of work, the joules or the calories contained in a barrel of oil when you burn it, it contains the equivalent of 4.5 years of human labor. Now, that number is discounted for efficiency and for national holidays and work weeks, and I can give you the reference that goes through the math, but the actual number on the straight division is much higher than 4.5 years, but let's just say that's a pretty good number. I've checked it 1,000,000 times. So the world consumes 85 billion barrels of oil equivalent. That means the energy of natural gas and coal converted to barrels of oil per year. And so if you multiply 4.5 years times 85 billion barrels of oil equivalent consumed, that means that we have 350 billion fossil energy workers or slaves that are working for us to keep our economy moving 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days per year. On average, each one of us owns 44 fossil slaves. Now, none of us were around during the Civil War, but before the war, when there was slavery legal, a human that owned 44 human slaves was a very rich person. On average, everyone on the planet owns 44 fossil slaves. So if you're looking for all the progress that's been made in the 20th and the 21st centuries, the lifting of people out of poverty, we want to think it's because we're so darn clever. Technology. No, it's fossil energy. It's real simple. It's real straightforward. We have a stratagem, at least our world leadership does, that the solution to climate change, the solution to the ecological crises that we have, is to substitute one form of energy, fossil fuels, with another, which is renewable energy. And it sure sounds like a pretty good idea, but the problem, as I've already shown you, is that nothing's being subtracted. So the graph on the left, it shows oil in light blue, natural gas in red, coal in gray, and wind and solar in red, in orange. And so back to the fossil slave, we are adding an average of 4.7 billion work year equivalents on top of the 360 billion that I just cited every year. And that's the average over the last decade. So here's the average line. So we're not reducing anything. We're adding more and more fossil slaves and wind and solar slaves all the time. And the emissions keep going up. And so the way I look at it, there's no amount of energy substitution that we can realistically accomplish, let's say in the next 25 or 30 years, that's going to change anything that I've shown you today. Energy substitution is a doomsday approach. It condemns civilization to the status quo path on right now of endless economic growth and the biophysical destruction of the planet. We're convincing ourselves that we're doing a good thing, but the data says, no, you're not. You're just continuing the bad thing and making yourself feel better about it. Told you I was going to shock you. Climate change is not the biggest problem facing the planet. It's a huge problem, don't get me wrong, but it is a symptom. It's a consequence of the much larger problem of overshooting the planet's carrying capacity. The carrying capacity of the planet is its ability to recover from the impact of human activity, extraction of resources, and pollution. The planet is amazingly resilient and capable of great recovery from all the damage that we do to it, just like our bodies. You know, we go out and, eat a giant meal and drink too much. And for the most part, the next day, if we don't continue those bad habits, sometime around noon, we start to recover and feel better. And if we lay off the heavy eating and the drinking for a couple of days, we've recovered. That's our carrying capacity. Unfortunately, we are overshooting the planet's recovery or carrying capacity by a factor of about 1.7. And that's what this graph shows on the right. So we had a little bit of a surplus in the planet's ability to recover in blue just after World War II. We went into deficit in about 1970, and we are in very, very deep deficit right now. Percent of carrying capacity, and somebody's going to say, where do you get that from? And I'll tell you that there is a website and a network called the Global Footprint Network. You can go out there. You guys are teachers. You know how to do research. Come back to me and tell me if you think it's wrong. Is 1.7 too low or too high? Should it be 1.5? Should it be 2? I don't know. These are kind of relative things, but we're eating and drinking too much. And unless this changes, then we're harming the planet and therefore ourselves, because our wealth comes from the ecosystem. If the ecosystem is in bad shape, if we're living in a sewer, it's going to be hard to not get sick. I mean, it's just kind of that simple. And so there's a lot of people who think, well, we just, the important thing is that humans prosper. And we're kind of sorry for, all the birds and the reptiles and everything that the human enterprise squeezes out of our cities and, into more and more difficult environments, a little bit of loss of biodiversity. It's kind of sad, but, look, they'll be okay. Well, no, they won't, actually. This graph shows that the average abundance of wild animal species, this is all animals, okay, has decreased 69% since 1970. 69%. I mean, if this were a country, they'd be in The Hague, charged with genocide. The human species, and I'm not talking about extinctions here, Not talking about extinctions at all. I'm talking about the reduction in the number of birds, the number of insects, the number of reptiles. And this is not, some natural process. This is going on. This is us, our activities. This is the overshooting of the planetary boundaries. That in order to make room for us and all of our extravagance, we're killing everything else on the planet. I mean, that's a tough message. I hate to give it to you, but this is the data. Again, go look for it. You can find this. This is a report that was done by the World Wildlife Federation in conjunction with either Cambridge or Oxford in England. You want to say their numbers are too extreme? Fine. Maybe we've only reduced the abundance of other species by 50%. It's still genocide. This is a big problem. And it's not a problem because, I feel warm and cozy about other species. Again, it gets back to the fact that if the ecosystem is not in good shape, then everybody suffers. So my point is that in the beginning, I told you that climate change was a narrow view. We need a systems view. We need to be able to think in terms of many different important threads that are going on simultaneously if we're going to be able to address what's going on and try to figure out what to do about it if there is anything we can do about it. And this graph then shows population are the gray bars, energy consumption is the blue line, our ecological footprint or overshoot is the green line, gross domestic product is the black line, and carbon emissions are the red line. Okay, so I've normalized all of these things so I can show them on one graph. And again, you don't need a degree in statistics to realize that as long as energy consumption and its corollaries, population growth, economic growth, continue to increase, carbon emissions and our ecological footprint on the planet will continue to increase. And anyone who tells you differently needs to show me what's wrong with this graph, or in what way will it be different in the future than it is in the present and has been for 225 years of very solid data. So instead of trying to solve the problem, we need to understand the problem first. And just going straight to carbon emissions, let's reduce carbon emissions. We have to understand, well, where do these carbon emissions come from? They come from energy consumption. What's energy consumption for? Well, energy consumption supports the civilization, which collapses without cement, concrete, plastic, steel, and fertilizer. Well, we don't want that. Okay, well, then you better be careful about how you decrease energy consumption. We decrease energy consumption, we decrease GDP. We decrease GDP, that means that people suffer. It means that people go into poverty. We decrease energy consumption and we decrease population. People die. We don't have enough fertilizer to feed everyone. Okay, so I'm not saying there's nothing that we can do. I'm saying it's complicated. Systems are complicated. The Earth is a complex system. And if we just tinker around with little pieces of it, we're probably going to get ourselves into more trouble than we started. Now, before I end, I want to introduce you to two other of my heroes. The first one was a fellow named Alfred Lotka. And Lotka, way back in the 1920s, said, you know what? Darwin's idea about natural selection, the idea of survival of the fittest, was only partly right. What he was really saying was those species that are most effective at extracting energy are the ones that are the fittest. And then Howard Odum came along about 50, 60 years later, and he stated what's called the maximum power principle. And the maximum power principle simply states that systems, all systems, particularly life systems, are going to they're going to grab the low-hanging fruit. They're going to maximize their energy intake and their energy transformation, because that's how species survive, including us. And so any solution that you want, or any series of stratagems that will reduce emissions, need to recognize that we, in all life forms, are programmed with this maximum power principle. We want to get the most bang for our buck right now. And sorry to say, but the maximum bang is coal, natural gas, and oil. It's not renewables. And human beings have never gone from a more energy efficient or productive power source to a lower one. We've never done it. And that's what we're saying we're going to do. And we need to think about that. If it's never been done in 300,000 years, then what do you think the probability is that it's going to be successful, especially once you turn human behavior loose on? So this is my final slide. I'm showing on the left this Jenga tower. My grandchildren always want me to play games with them, and Jenga is one of them. And for those who, most of you are familiar, but for those who aren't familiar, you build a tower and you pull pieces out of the tower. And the idea is to try to pull pieces out of the Jenga tower without collapsing the tower. But everybody involved in the game knows that eventually the tower is going to collapse. And whoever is unlucky enough to pull the piece that causes it to collapse loses the game. Well, that's what we're doing right now with the Earth. Okay, we humans are saying, well, let's pull out a piece here. Let's pull out oil. And maybe the tower won't fall down on my turn. Maybe it'll fall down on yours. Well, hey, it didn't fall down. Let's pull out natural gas. Let's pull out coal. And we all know in this game that the tower is going to fall down. It's not a question of if, it's when and to whom. And that's the game we're playing right now. Climate change and overshoot are as obvious as gravity. I mean, the only people who have discussions, arguments about gravity are theoretical physicists. And yet everybody in the whole world feels like they're an expert on, climate change isn't real, overshoot's not real, you're just bending information, it's all propaganda, it's all rigged, et cetera, et cetera. And most of the people that get involved in these discussions have absolutely no life experience or background to make those judgments. They're entitled to their opinion, absolutely. But for those of us that do have those qualifications, these things are as obvious as gravity. Why are we pursuing plans that don't make any sense to me? Not because anybody's stupid, not because anybody's incompetent. It's because our leaders and most people are what I call energy blind. They don't understand any of the things that I've been trying to explain. They think the economy runs on money. Okay, that's fine. Why shouldn't they? But it doesn't. And so if you don't understand the system that you're dealing with, then you're trying to do something. It's like trying to find your way out of the woods without a map. We're pretty clever. If we just keep on going in this direction, maybe we'll get out of here. Well, maybe we will, and maybe we won't. Maybe we survive and maybe we die. But since we didn't just find ourselves lost in the wilderness, since we understand the situation, let's get a damn map. Or let's give our leaders a map and say, look, here's the territory, here's the terrain. Now, the way that you're trying to lead us out of the woods, it isn't working. Maybe a good idea, but it isn't working. The idea that there are obvious fixes for this, it's just wrong. I mean, I sure wish that there were, but I've looked for them. I've looked for them for 40 years, and it's just not that simple. The idea that somehow technology and innovation is going to figure this out for us, I think is absolutely delusional. Fossil energy has been the primary driver of most of the good things that have happened to human society since its beginning, but certainly over the last couple of hundred years. Technology and innovation are stowaways on that ship. They think they're guiding the vessel, but they don't. They're completely ignorant of the gigantic diesel engines under their feet that are actually driving the vessel. The idea that we can substitute one form of energy for another and it's going to solve all our problems is also delusional. And even if it were true, we don't have time to do it. What I hope that you take away from this talk, first of all, don't be depressed. I'm not depressed. I'm not a doomster at all. But I like having a map. I like understanding what it is that I have to work my way out of. I need to figure out. I like knowing that there is a way out of the woods. It's not easy and it won't be fun, but at least I got a map. And that's what I'm trying to persuade you is, we need a map. And what we got right now, we're blind. We're energy blind. And as long as we're energy blind, we're never getting out of the woods. The answer, is there an answer? Absolutely, there's an answer. And it's the simplest answer imaginable. Use less energy. If we use less energy, and I don't mean a little bit, I mean a lot, over time, then all of these problems will go away. Now, is that without consequences? No, it's not. It's absolutely with serious consequences for things like our standard of living. But if we understand that that's what we're doing and we kind of ease our way into it, then we'll be able to come out of it minimizing the suffering and the damage. My point is, we are in a predicament. I call it the human predicament. It's really the predicament of everything and every species that lives on this planet. But unfortunately, we're the ones that are driving the thing here. So I'm calling it the human predicament. We got to get honest with ourselves. We got to stop deluding ourselves that there's an easy way out of this or that we're well on our way, because the data tells me we haven't even gotten started. That's what I have to say. I tried to warn you. It was not going to be perhaps what you want to hear. And I certainly appreciate you giving me the time to say this. It's not meant to be a gloomy or a doomy talk. It's meant to say, let's get real. Let's get honest about what we have to do here. And please, let's teach our children that the world they're about to inherit is not going to get better because we put some solar panels on our house and the family buys a Tesla. Thanks so much for your time.
Wow, that was amazing.
Yes, thank you very much. There's a lot to think about there. I wanted to ask, one thing you didn't mention in your talk was nuclear power. Now,
Right.
I know there's problems with nuclear power, but if we started investing in more nuclear power, is that a way to change the paradigm?
No. And the reason is very simple. Well, there are many reasons, but let me give you the two most important reasons. Nuclear power, along with wind and solar, have one use only, and that is generating electric power. Now, that's important. And it's particularly important because the number one source of global emissions is from coal, and coal is the principal source of electric power. So if we can substitute other forms of generating electric power for coal, then we are starting to scratch the surface. But here's the problem. Electric power generation is 20% of total energy consumption. And so this is the Pareto effect, all right? We're all really gung-ho about solving the 20% when it's the 80% that's going to kill us, okay? And somebody's going to say, oh, well, wait a minute, isn't there a lot of heat that's generated from nuclear power? And there's some, but sorry to say, it's a relatively low level of heat compared to what's needed for things like refining steel, producing concrete. I mean, do you guys know that in order to produce concrete, forget about all the extraction and everything else, we need to maintain, sustain temperatures of 2,600 degrees, like for days at a time. That's not, you're not going to do that with a space heater. This is why it's so difficult. Similarly, when we're refining steel, we've got to use coal, unfortunately. So, these are not trivial problems we solve. Now, the second reason that nuclear power is not a solution is that if you look at the number of nuclear plants that are built every year, and I've written a post on here. You can find it on my website, artberman.com, and I might be screwing up the number a little bit here. But as I recall, over the last year or two, we've averaged about, I want to say, 25 nuclear power plants are built every year, completed every year. And if you look at the projections made by, you name your agency, International Energy Agency, the U.S. Department of Energy, OPEC, and, Shell, any of these guys, they're going to tell you that nuclear is going to be about 2% of energy consumption by 2050. Say they're wrong, double it, 4%. Okay, triple it, 6%. Okay, so what would it take? How many do we need to build every year to make it 4%, or just to double it, whatever the right number is? And the answer is, well, multiply 24 by 2 and it's 48. Okay. What's the likelihood that we're going to double the number of nuclear power plants starting tomorrow with all the permitting and the financing and the public kind of, recoil from doing this? The answer is it's very close to zero. And we don't need 4% nuclear to make it a solution. We need like 50%. We need to be building hundreds and hundreds of nuclear power plants every year. It ain't happening. I'm sorry. And some smart persons say, oh yeah, well, but what about, SMRs, small modular reactors? Okay, well, maybe we don't need to build these multi-billion-dollar, multi-year, hard to permit, hard to finance kind of giant power plants. Well, great, but guess what? You know how many SMRs there are in the world today? Zero. There are zero. It's an idea, and it's a doable idea, believe me. But if it's not on the shelf, if it's not something that we can deploy today, then I say keep working on it, but I'm not going to count on you. All right, we need something that we need things that we can do today, unless we don't believe that there's any window of urgency on climate change or the planetary crisis. And I'm 100% convinced that there is. And I don't think we've got until 2050 to fix it either. But that's another conversation altogether. So with all of these ideas that we see and hear about and read about, we have to ask ourselves, gee, that's cool. We generated, 1/1000th of a joule of electric power from a nuclear fusion device that cost $100 billion to build. That's pretty cool. But, when will that be available on some scale that makes a difference? And you can ask the most enthusiastic nuclear person in the world who knows anything, and he's going to say decades. Okay, so again, is it scalable? If it is, when? And what's it going to cost, and who's going to pay for it?
Right.
And that's the real world. And in the real world, you put all those filters on most of the things that people are holding out hope for, and they start to look, yeah, probably not. Probably not.
Okay.
So again, my message isn't don't go jump out the window. Don't, just because your favorite solution is something that I shot down. First of all, check it out. Maybe I'm trying to depress you, but believe me, I mean, what I'm showing you in this set of slides, and this is all publicly available. I mean, anybody who wants to take a few hundred hours to research it, as I have, can reconstruct this, and we can argue around the margins. Is art off by 15%? Okay, I'm sure I'm off by 15%. I might be off on the low side by 15%, but yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty in here. But I feel reasonably confident that what I'm showing you is directionally or notionally describing the problem. And so my message is, let's stop thinking that there's an easy and a quick fix, because I know in my life, it doesn't work that way.
Okay. Well, we do have a couple of raised hands here. Larissa, do you have a question?
Yes, I was just curious about a couple of things. First of all, that one graph about the countries that use the most energy.
Mm-hmm.
As the other nations are developing, because what I think I'm hearing is in general that the world needs to use less energy, as a whole, or the individual. And of course, we are the ones that use the most energy currently.
Right.
But as the other countries are developing, my question is, if you were advising, like, let's say a president as to what to do or how to change things, and you were to advise that, let's say, Americans need to figure out a way to use less energy, then what about the countries that are developing that are now putting their energy up from like biomass to coal as their next step as they keep on going and advancing?
Now, this is the maximum power principle in action. Okay, they want to get access to the most productive forms of energy, just like we did as more developed countries 50, 60, 70 years ago, just like all species do. You cannot tell them not to do that it's not in their interest. I'm not a determinist or anything, but I do believe that Locke had it right, that, this is part of our genetic engineering to do that. And it's not just humans, it's all life forms. And that's why species go extinct. They grab as much energy as they can until they poison themselves. I was on a trip a few years ago to Africa, and the elephants, which are by far the most intelligent species out on the savannah, they're eating all the trees, and they haven't had any rain in certain parts of the savannah for many years, and in order to keep themselves alive, they're destroying their source of life. What are you going to do? You have a conversation with those guys? They need to eat, right? So this is a big problem. And what will happen, I believe, is that we're way past the time to have said, hey, we need to do something consciously about this. That was probably 50 years ago. And so we can all, light our hair on fire and get really upset about what's happening. But what will happen is that nature will impose less energy consumption upon us through some combination of economic decrease, depression, if you will, too much environmental damage, you name your poison, war. One way or another, we are going to reduce our energy consumption, and it's probably not going to be voluntary, because maximum power principle says people don't choose to do that. And so the more we let nature do it for us, the more traumatic it will be for humans. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not in any way, I do not believe that humans will become extinct. I don't think that at all. I think we have the capability of extinguishing ourselves as a species. Nuclear war is the way to do that. That would do it. And hopefully we avoid that. But I think that we like all other species, we have to make some very significant adaptations, or else we may look at some time, becoming a much less dominant species, if you will, which wouldn't be a terrible thing either. But all those kinds of what ifs and maybes are really way outside of the purview of this conversation. The point that I'm trying to make to you is I'm not suggesting solutions. In fact, I'm encouraging you to not think about solutions until you understand the problem and understand just how nasty and thorny and complex this problem is and does not lend itself to easy decisions. How you teach that, I'm available for pro bono consulting on that sort of thing. But, we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to understand the challenge in front of us before we start solving it. We always get into trouble. We create more problems than we started with, trying to fix things before we understand.
Thank you, Art, for your talk. I don't necessarily call it depressing. I think it's more critical in that sense. Is that lens that you're providing is important and allows us to see things from a more systems-based perspective. But with that said, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how do we approach this with our students. I know as teachers, we think the same way of like, well, the system is a mess, but you can't fight the system by yourself. You can do it from the classroom on your own. And that, in a way, is my message to my students. You may perhaps you cannot change all this. You cannot completely come up with the solutions. But from here, from now, what can you possibly do? And that is my question to you.
Yeah. So there are a few things that we can do. The most important is psychological. That if I'm even partly right in what I'm telling you, that the world that your students, my grandchildren, face is going to be incredibly more difficult than the one that we face right now and that most of us grew up in. And so the most important thing, the first thing, and the only thing that we can control is to try to teach our future leaders, our children, ways in which they can be psychologically more resilient, which is to say, stop looking for somebody else to solve your problems. Stop looking for some quick fix. Somebody's going to figure this out, or maybe we can all follow Elon Musk to live on Mars. I mean, if you want to live on a desert, let's all move to Saudi Arabia. At least it has an atmosphere. To me, I mean, these are like ridiculous sorts of solutions. But so I think the number one focus for all humans is to try to figure out how you can live a fulfilling life with what you have, as opposed to what you think you need. Because if any of what I'm saying is anywhere near correct, if any of what the climate scientists are telling us is anywhere near correct, life is going to get increasingly more difficult. And so our ability to be satisfied and fulfilled with what we have is the number one thing. The number two thing, I suppose, is at some point, I think we have to, kind of playing a poker game with our leadership. I think we have to call their hand. Young people are good at that. They really are. I mean, young people are amazing at, things, like organizing the extinction movement, or young people in high schools where they had shootings. Putting the pressure on lawmakers to at least pay attention. I don't think they expect the lawmakers are going to outlaw guns or anything, but they've been effective at getting attention. And I think we have to call BS on what's happening here. I mean, 36 international climate conferences over the last 40 years, and emissions just keep going up and up and up and up. Can you guys show us? I mean, what's in your hand? Do you have a pair of anything, or are you just, or are you just bluffing? Because this isn't working. I mean, it's just empirical. I'm not a climate expert. I'm just, I just look at the data. What you're doing is not working. Show us what you plan to do next. Now, that's not for me to do, but maybe our young people can do that. Some level of agency, I guess. You have a voice. You can learn what faces you in the world. Publicly available, all this information. You have excellent teachers who can guide you. So figure out how you can learn to be satisfied and how you can try to put appropriate pressure on decision makers, because eventually they make the decisions, and that's what matters. And do what makes you feel good about yourself. Understand, that by using less energy yourself, you're probably not going to move the needle very much. But if it makes you feel good about what you're doing, you should. And by the way, I mean, every time I drive past an elementary school or a middle school, I mean, there's a line of cars about 6 miles long with people sitting in their cars idling internal combustion engines and Teslas for what? I mean, that's something that the kids can start talking to their parents about. I mean, you guys really need to be doing that. I mean, okay, you're worried about me, you're worried about me getting abducted or something like that, but this is nuts. This is exactly the kind of thing we got to figure out how to cut out. That'd be a good project. How can we get to and from school without burning a 0.5 gigaton of carbon emissions every day just to do it? There's a project for you.
Andrew?
Yeah, I did have a question, and I guess that was very interesting that you said at the very end, is that would you consider that not to reduce our amount of energy, would that be an efficiency issue within our system? Like how you said, like, do we need to be idling to pick up young children, or we could make this system more efficient? Like, is efficiency part of this idea that 1% to 1% a year, is that too small of a change? Or like the change within the efficiencies of systems, like how you mentioned, and our maybe not just mechanically efficient, but more psychologically efficient. Is that helping with the issue?
Well, that's a really thought-provoking question, and it's so thought-provoking. I don't know the answer, but let me say that if past is prelude, then the answer is no. But what I like about the way you thought through the question is you separated it into sort of mechanical things and other kinds of things. So are we going to get super efficient at extracting energy from solar panels? Are we going to be able to double or triple our efficiency in short order? And I would say probability of that is, like so close to zero that it's probably not worth the effort. It may be more than 1% because we're dealing with a new technology or a newer technology. But always the question is the benefit worth the effort? And so, well, if we could improve solar efficiency by 2 or 3%, we could double or triple the rate. Would that make a difference? And the answer, first of all, is I don't know, but probably not. Right? So, but our human system, can we be more efficient with the way that we work together and communicate and solve problems? And I think there, yes, we can. And so if we've got, let's just round numbers, there's 100 cars waiting outside to pick up the kids at 3 p.m. or whenever school lets out. All right. We got to be able to figure out a way of cutting that down. I mean, this is not rocket science, okay? All we need to do is figure out, surely there's ride sharing and buses. I mean, there are ways to get that from 100 cars to 50 cars before the school year's over. There's got to be a way. But we're not trying. We're just accepting it as well as parents do, and we don't want to upset the parents because they're worried about their kids. And I get that. I have 4 kids. I still worry about them, and they're adults. All right, so I'm not in any way diminishing the cause of the concern. But that should be something we can do something about. And if we can do something at that scale, then that says, well, maybe it's time to up our game a little bit. What's the next thing that's sort of within our purview or your kids' purview that they might be able to solve? And you start doing things like that, and they start to get some confidence. Hey, we're pretty smart. Maybe this idea that the people that are leading us know more than we do, maybe that's not something that we want to necessarily assume to be true. Doesn't mean we want an insurrection, but I think it's worth asking, and young people need to learn to ask, what if we're just as smart as they are? What then?
Oh, I think in many cases they are. It's not a what if. It's not a what if at all.
No, I agree. I never would have played Jenga on my own, that's for sure.
Okay. Well, I would like to say thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon. We really appreciate what you had to say, and thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. And again, I hope I didn't overly upset anyone, but I think this is a message that is important, and I don't know a soft way to present it.
I think everybody needs to hear this message.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad you agree. I think so too. All right. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.